Hello everyone, welcome to another deck profile with me, Chocobilly, and the deck I'm looking at this week is called Backstab 2.0, so it's my second revision of this, or my first revision of this deck, my second stab at it. So yeah, it's a deck focusing primarily on utilising Ardyn from Opus 18 starter deck. So when actually let me just read them. So when a forward is put from the field into the break zone during this turn, the cost required to cast your next forward is reduced by 5. It cannot become 0. This effect will only trigger once per turn, so focusing heavily on that effect. Now, as you probably well know, any deck that focuses so heavily on one card like that doesn't immediately win you the game is going to be a bit slow, and it is ultimately a fairly big setup deck. You have to get your backups down and make sure that you aren't just being stormed. So yeah, I mean, you can't control that really, because this isn't control, this is aggression, but there are some fun things you can do in the deck, and if you are able to set up, and you know, this is ultimately a very friendly focused deck, there are some really fun things. So what I'm going to do is actually start with the backups first, just so it sets the baseline, then I'll focus on the forwards, and then the monsters, and finally the summons. So backups, it's utilising the Agito engine. So you've got Kalia Shivol, which can obviously search Miyu, which can obviously search Mitsuki or Quan. So it depends which way you want to go, which element you rather focus on. It's a fairly even split between fire and lightning, with 24 to 26, so slightly leaning towards lightning. But ultimately, if you get Miyu first, you can play that onto the field to search your Quan. You can then play Kalia Shivol to then search your Mitsuki, for example. But ultimately, you're able to just get any of the Agito cadets and play them onto the field. Now Mitsuki has the effect of pay 1 and dull, choose one forward, deal 1000 damage. Bear that in mind, because that ability is actually very useful later down the line. I'll show you where. And then obviously you've got Quan, dull, well, pay 1 and dull, choose one forward, you control until the end of the turn, it gains 2000 power and haste. You can only use the ability if you only control one forward. Again, very useful when in a deck where you're going to be killing a lot of your own cards, but also we're utilising monsters as well. So it might be a case that you actually have a couple of monsters and then one forward. You can use Quan on that one forward and then make your monsters forwards as well, so you still technically have 3. And then on top of that, we have 2 samurais and 2 ninjas as well to generate crystals. Those are really your only crystal generators in this deck. Now, stands to reason, you should probably run Lady Lilith? Yeah, Lady Lilith in a lightning deck that utilizes crystals, but I didn't want to focus that heavily on 1, destroying my own stuff, but 2, she's also one of the best crystal generators because she's also one of the best crystal spenders, and I didn't want to focus too heavily on her as a card. I wanted to just utilize the crystals where I can. There aren't too many cards that use it in this deck, so just having 4 crystal generators, bearing in mind that you've got a very successful engine to be able to get to basically 4 backups already. You know, you don't really necessarily need ninja or samurai there, so having 4 there to get you the crystals, probably worth it. Right, let's move on to the forwards. So, Ewan. When Ewan enters the field, choose one damage forward, break it. He's a 1 CP, only 2k in power, but ultimately 1 CP just to break a damage forward, it's quite nice. Now, again, combine that with Mitsuki, where you've paid 2 effectively, because you have to dull 1 and pay 1. You know, dull 1, pay 1, and then play Ewan onto the field to break basically any forward that can take damage and be targeted. That's not too bad if you ask me. And then it also works nicely with Phoenix from Opus 3 as well, because you cast Phoenix choosing Ewan in your break zone, deal 2k to everything on your opponent's board, Ewan enters the field, target said forward, break it. Then we've got Assassin as well, so similar to Ewan, but not quite the same, that's why there's only 1 of instead of 2. But ultimately, put Assassin into the break zone, choose one damage forward, break it. You can only use ability during your turn. So you have to put the Assassin into the break zone to actually get the effect, which is not as good, but it's still an outright break on basically anything, which again with Mitsuki, quite useful. When it enters the field, you can also pay 2 lightning and 1. When you do so, choose one forward, deal 3k damage, so you can kind of just pay 4 for Assassin to then immediately break something, but I'm not huge on that paying 3 for 3k damage. I'd rather utilize it a different way. That's why there's only 1. Next up, we have Warrior of Light. So when Warrior of Light enters the field, reveal the top 4 cards of your deck. Remove 1 card among them from the game, and return the other cards to the bottom of the deck in any order. You can cast it at any time you could normally cast it this turn. So there's a few fun things you can do with this card. Now, obviously, this card is focused on utilizing Ardyn's effect of, you know, a forward is broken, next forward to be cast is reduced by 5. Now, the thing to bear in mind is that before you trigger Ardyn's effect is when you want Warrior of Light to come onto field, because if, say, something gets put from field to the break zone, triggers Ardyn, if you then play Warrior of Light would be the one that has his cost reduced. So you want Warrior Light on the field, then Breaker forward, and then you can cast one of the cards that Warrior Light reveals. And because it's cast, and Ardyn just simply states the cost required to cast the next forward is reduced by 5. It doesn't state that it has to be from hand, just the next forward, the next cost to cast a forward is reduced by 5. So it means that ultimately you can cast something off of Warrior Light's effect for -5, which is really cool because it reveals 4 cards, so hopefully you'll hit something that you don't already have on the field or can at least cast. Also, could be kind of fun, and I say fun with a big asterisk here, because you could play Phoenix to play Warrior Light onto the field on your opponent's turn, hope you hit a summon off of the top 4 cards, and then be able to cast one of those, because again, it still states that you can cast whatever the card is, provided it's castable this turn. Next up we have Palom. So this is one of our crystal users. When he enters the field, pay a crystal. When you do so, choose one forward, deal it 8,000 damage. Just wanted to put him in here because, one, I haven't really used him much, but also a 2 CP to deal 8k off of a backup that you're probably going to play anyway. That's not so bad. And again, playable off of Phoenix as well. So it might be a case that your opponent attacks with a forward. You Phoenix, play Palom onto the field, you deal 8k to another forward, and then you block with that forward as well. Bearing in mind with Phoenix, that's 2k to the opponent's board, and then Palom re-entering, that is then 5k block potentially. So you get to basically 10k one forward and 7k another. Mirror. So this is a bit of a fun one with some tricks up my sleeve. So when an opponent's forward enters the field, you may pay 1 win and discard 1 monster. When you do so, break that forward. Now there are only 4 monsters in the deck, so the chances are you're probably not going to be using that effect. What I'm really focusing on is the second effect of put 1 monster into the break zone, play Mirror onto the field dull. You can only use ability during your turn only if Mirror is in the break zone. So it could be a case that actually you make, let's say, Shadow Dragon into a forward and then put it into the break zone to then play Mirror onto the field, thereby triggering Ardyn's effect, because a forward you control has been put from the field into the break zone. And then you can play maybe something like Ject or Rain onto the field for -5, so technically 1 because it can't become 0. So just another way to be able to trigger Ardyn's effect, but also Mirror does have a half-decent effect upon if your opponent tries to play something, so at least you can use Shadow Dragon that way. Also means if your opponent maybe plays something like the Idolus Fire backup to then play something onto the field, or they cast their own Phoenix, you can respond by either putting a monster into the break zone or casting your own Phoenix to then play Mirror onto the field, so that when they do play the said forward onto the field, you can then discard a monster and pay 1 to break that forward as well. Right, next up we have Ramza. I did originally have 2 of this card in my deck, but I ironically found that I was never having any crystals, despite the fact I have 4 crystal generators in my backups. So I dropped him down to 1, because when he enters the field, if you have a crystal, he gains haste, and then when he's put from the field into the break zone, choose 1 forward opponent controls, break it. So it works nicely if you play him onto the field with a crystal, attack with him, your opponent doesn't want to block, deal your opponent point damage, you then play Chimera onto the field to then break Ramza, and then you get to break one of your opponent's forwards as well. And then Ardyn, obviously, Brave, 9k, that's perfectly fine, and then he's also got the Royal Retribution S, which is an S, Fire, Lightning, Dull, choose 1 forward, it loses all its abilities in the turn, and you get to break it. That's not the worst. Next up we have Rain. So I actually was going to include the, I think it's Opus 19 or Opus 20 Rain, where if you control, X amount of forwards and his cost is reduced. But actually I wanted to focus on this one because it makes a bit more sense. So it's an EX burst, but when Rain enters the field, choose 1 forward opponent controls. If a forward you control has been put from the field into the break zone this turn, deal it 9,000 damage. And, there's a fair amount of self-sacrifice within this deck. So it means that you've got a means of triggering Rain's effect. And again, it could be putting a monster into the break zone, which was a forward. It could be using Chimera to break one of your forwards. There's various different ways. Ject is another means. You can put Ject into the break zone to search one light or dark character and add it to your hand. Now, when he enters the field, deal something 4k. Chances are you're not going to be killing anything, because I think he's quite literally the only Final Fantasy X card in the deck. Yeah, so he will only ever deal 4k upon entry, but there is only 1 of them, so fair enough, swings and roundabouts. But you could utilize that, or Ject gets played into the field, then play Ewan, break it forward, but then you can put Ject into the break zone to search a dark card. What dark cards, you ask? Well, we've got Golbez from Opus 17 and Chaos from Opus 16. I'll go on more about those later because they're fun cards, but ultimately you can use Ject to put them into the break zone, trigger Ardyn's effect, to then reduce the cost of Golbez or Chaos if you wanted to. That's a lot of talking. Next we have Man in Black. Again, only a one-off. Could probably drop it up, make it a 2, but be able to recast some of your summons from the break zone. I don't have to talk about Man in Black and why it's good, but ultimately you can reduce its cost through Ardyn, maybe become 1k or 1 CP, sorry, and then recast some of the summons, and there's lots of good summons in the deck. Golbez. So I'm going to talk about Golbez and Chaos together because they're in the deck for partly the same reason. So firstly, you can reduce Golbez's cost by 2. Just the only drawback is that when he's played onto the field, you then put him immediately into the break zone, which then triggers Ardyn, which is quite funny. Now, obviously, when he plays onto the field, you can choose a character in break zone, add it to your hand, or choose one forward, break it. Now, 9 times out of 10, it'll be choose a forward, break it, right? But ultimately, that means play Golbez onto the field for only 4, put him into the break zone, put your opponent's forward into the break zone, you can then cast the next forward for -5. Now, obviously, you could have paid the full cost for Golbez and still get that effect because you're breaking one of your opponent's forwards, but ultimately it's just a means of breaking your own forward as well. Now, you can play Golbez onto the field, and again, it's also to make Golbez cheaper, but you can play Golbez onto the field, and that will also trigger Shadow Dragon, which you can pay 1 when Golbez enters, to then play Shadow Dragon onto the field as well, which means you get to break potentially 2 forwards as well. But what's fun about this is that, let's say hypothetically a forward has already been broken this turn, say Ject. That will then trigger Ardyn's effect to reduce the cost of the next thing. You could then use that same effect alongside Golbez's cost reduction effect to then make him only cost 1 CP. Now, bear in mind that, certain effects say can just reduce their cost, but it doesn't say it can't become 0. Because Ardyn states it can't become 0, if you trigger Ardyn's effect, it will always have to pay 1. And the similar sort of effect applies to Chaos as well. So the cost required to cast Chaos is reduced by 2 for each element among the characters your opponent controls. So let's say your opponent's in just a 2-element deck. That means his cost is reduced by 4. So he becomes a 7k or 7 CP forward. However, let's say you put Ject into the break zone to search yourself for Chaos, triggering Ardyn's effect. That means Chaos will now be -4 for the elements your opponent controls. That then will also be -5 because of Ardyn's effect. So Chaos now only costs you 2, which isn't too bad, considering you get to steal one of your opponent's forwards. Steal one of your opponent's forwards, play Chimera to then kill their forward as well. So, works nicely. Obviously, you've got Chaos' own effect as well to be able to break something, but still, it's a lot of fun. And Chaos also works well with Melusine because obviously you can let's say you've had Chaos on the field for a turn, you play Melusine onto the field, take your opponent's forward, but only for that turn. You can then dial Chaos to break that forward to then break another opponent's forwards as well. Next up we have Demon and Sephiroth. These are 2 cards that are just in the deck to utilize coming onto the field for cheap, basically, because if you do get to kill something and then trigger Ardyn's effect, play the Demon for only 2 is really, really strong. Even if you play Demon onto the field for only 2 to empty your opponent's break zone, and if there's no forwards on the field, you have to target Demon for 2 CP, even if you're killing your own Demon. To empty your opponent's break zone might not be the worst thing in the world. And then similarly, Sephiroth as well can just break any forward upon entry, but I like him because he has just a 1 CP warp, which is really good, and his S ability, just a discard of the S, choose one forward your opponent choose one forward of cost 3 or less, break it. Nice and simple. And then they have already gone over Chaos as well. So yeah, lots of aggression, lots of killing your opponent's things, but also killing some of your own things as well. I'll go over the monsters now as well. So Chimera. Chimera obviously can be utilized alongside Melusine to, break one of your opponent's forwards. Alongside Chaos, break one of your opponent's forwards. But there are loads of forwards that you control as well that like your forwards dying. So obviously Ardyn, but then also Ramza with a crystal. To be fair, that's probably kind of it. But, even if you're breaking something like Ewan or Assassin, you've only paid 1 CP for them. If they've done their thing, that's fine. And then, he's an 8k forward as well. For only 1 CP, yes, you've had to kill one of your own. And technically it can be a character as well, so it might be that you want to play Shadow Dragon onto the field through your Golbez to then re-break something. You play Chimera, break your Shadow Dragon, then play Golbez to replay Shadow Dragon. Melusine, taking control of one of your opponent's forwards is nice because obviously you get to kill your own thing as well. If it has haste though, you could potentially attack with said forward. So Belias, if you are at damage 4, it means that you can give that forward haste. Normally this Belias would only trigger the first strike, draw a card and plus 1000, but again, damage 4, give that forward haste as well. So you can utilize that alongside Melusine, Chaos, so stealing either forward, giving it haste. Just give Chaos haste, for example. There's lots of good ways to be able to utilize it. And then finally Shadow Dragon in there as well. Again, this is mostly to utilize Shadow Dragon. I haven't really used the card much, but be able to break a forward of 3 or less. That's not too bad, if you ask me. But then playing Golbez onto the field to then play Shadow Dragon, potentially breaking 2 things as well. I like it. Right, and then finally we've got the summons. So just one Ramu to break a forward or monster of 2 CP or less, because Atomos, Evray, Jin, there's so many horrible monsters of 2 CP or less, so just having some means of being able to break them is nice. And again, replayable off of Man in Black. Belias, 2 Belias, because a sneaky +1 and first strike is really useful if you are on the block, drawing a card as well. It's an EX burst, but also damage 5. It's a bit of a catcher mechanic. So yeah, again, like I said before, this deck is a bit of a setup deck, so it might mean that you're on the back foot for some of it. So having something which actually benefits from you being on the back foot with Belias, and then start giving things haste. So if you do Chaos, take on your opponent's forwards, Belias your Chaos, Dull, break the forward you stole, break another forward. That's a big swing in your favor. Ramu, be able to give something haste, again, very, very useful, but then also just choose a forward, dull it, choose a forward, deal it 5k damage, followed by maybe playing Ewan onto the field to break the forward you dealt damage to. There's lots of good ways to be able to utilize this Ramu. Phoenix, you can play Ewan, Assassin, Warrior Light, Palom, Mira, Ramza. That's a good selection of forwards, all which will hopefully do something decent when they enter the field. Ewan will definitely break something, Assassin could break something, however you can only use that ability on your turn, so you'd have to play Phoenix on your turn, bring an Assassin, then break it. If you've got Ewan in there, might as well just do that on your opponent's turn, because it could be a forward that you would prefer to kill that they play in their turn. Warrior Light, as I already said again, but to recast things, could be fun. Palom, potentially dealing 10k something and blocking for 7. Mira, I mean, if your opponent's going to play something onto the field through an effect, getting Mira on the field and then discarding to kill it could work. And finally, Ramza, if you block with him, break something, break another thing as well. Exodus. Closest thing that Lightning's got to a board wipe outside of Garuda, which is 10 CP ultimately, which you could argue does kind of work in this deck, because if you can reduce its cost by 5, then it's only a 5 CP. It breaks all your own stuff as well, which would include Ardyn, which I'm not huge on. So yeah, just choose, even if it's killing 2 things, that's not too bad. Now bear in mind, obviously it might be killing your own forwards as well, but again, that might not be the worst thing in the world. If you're, say, breaking 2 costs and you also control Ramza, that means you get to break maybe a forward that isn't of the selected cost through Exodus's effect. Bahamut, be able to deal 10k something is always quite nice for 4 CP. However, you could deal 9k to one thing, kill it, and then 1k to something else, and then play Ewan on the field to kill the forward. And then finally Arc, because we're running Chaos, he has an 11 CP forward, so you get to play Arc. What you could do as well is you play Golbez onto the field for cheap, maybe 4, potentially less if you're using Ardyn's effect, but play Golbez onto the field. If it is cheaper, bear in mind that he puts himself into the break zone, but on the stack, you can then cast Arc for -6, so 3, which isn't too bad either, because you get to choose them forward, break it, your opponent casts 2 cards. For 3 CP, that's really strong. If you can keep on redoing that with Man in Black on the field, keep on attacking, keep on replaying Arc, if it's free, if you've got Chaos, or -6 with Golbez, yeah, that's just disgusting. And that is my Backstab deck. Weirdly, Ardyn seems to be doing the rounds recently. I built this deck a few weeks ago, and then I noticed that other people have been building the deck as well, so maybe I'll start at something. I very much doubt it. But it's just a really, really cool card, and I think people are utilising the other Ardyn as well. So, with this Ardyn having an S ability, and again, a pretty strong one, there's lots of fun things you can do with it, and be able to reduce the cost of already very strong cards, like the Demon and Chaos, is quite fun. And capitalising on those cards that can already reduce their own costs as well is a lot of fun. Making it so Chaos is, he's -4, but actually he's also -5, he's -9, so it's only 2 CP, wow, it's so much fun. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about the deck. What would you put in here? How would you change it? What cards would you like to play? Phil Thanos was another consideration as well, because having it so that maybe your Ardyn can't be broken, because let's face it, if Ardyn comes onto the field and he survives a turn, rather than having something like Demon or Golbez or Man in Black dying, it's probably going to be Ardyn because he's the enabler. But yeah, let me know what you guys have put in this deck. But it's a lot of fun to play, and I can't wait to try it out even more. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. Stay safe, be lucky, and I will see you in the next video.